Before we turn to the main event tonight, I want to take a moment to thank the many generous organizations and individuals that made our summit possible. We have an amazing group of sponsors who enable us to offer the summit at no cost for all of us. I will highlight some of our generous sponsors, and I'm excited to say we have a bunch of sponsors to highlight, and we will even get to hear from some of those sponsors themselves. So first, I would like to thank our headline Great Lakes sponsor tonight, the Presbytery of Chicago. The Presbytery wanted to share a word with you, which we will now play.
In the beginning, God. It is where all of creation began, and in truth, it's where all creating begins. Faith in Place is an organization that invites us to consider the partnership that God invited humans into at the moment of creation. We're invited to live our faith in a place, urban, suburban, rural, city, beautiful or concrete. Faith in place is an enactment of participation in God's creative power. The Presbytery of Chicago is proud to be a sponsoring partner of Faith in Place Summit for 2024. We hope that our work together will help create pocket after pocket and people after people who do their faith in place, caring for God's good creation and living in a way that sustains all that God has given to us.
Thank you to the Presbytery of Chicago for headlining as our Great Lakes sponsor tonight. Our keynote session this evening also has three cardinal sponsors: First Presbyterian Church of Columbus, Indiana, Illinois Environmental Council, and Countryside Church Unitarian Universalists. We'll now play a short message from Countryside Church in Palatine.
Hello, I'm Reverend Pam Romancic from the Countryside Unitarian Universalist Church in Palatine. We're excited to sponsor the Environmental and Spirituality Summit because it aligns so closely with one of our core values, respect for the interdependent web of life of which we are all a part. We affirm the work of Faith in Place to support local faith institutions in living in loving relationship with our earth home. Thank you, Faith in Place.
And we also have a message from First Presbyterian Church in Columbus, Indiana.
Hello, my name is Felipe Martinez. On behalf of First Presbyterian Church of Columbus, Indiana, we are happy to sponsor this important summit on our 200th anniversary year. We are connecting to creation and to one another, and we pray for God's blessings upon us as we begin our third century of ministry.
Thank you so much to our cardinal sponsors of our keynote session tonight. We're also really grateful for the summit's Jacob's Ladder sponsor, who is our longtime friend and supporter, Marilyn Antoinette. And many thanks to our Wild Indigo sponsors, Sunrun, United Unitarian Church of Evanston, ComEd, Natural Awakening Chicago, Focus on Energy, Woods Fund, and Windfree Solar. It's just so amazing to have so many great groups coming together to support our shared cause. We do have a message from ComEd, Focus on Energy, and Windfree Solar that we'd like to share at this time.
At ComEd, we understand a little help can really make someone's day. That's why we provide financial assistance and billing options to help you pay and manage your electric bill.
I would also like to share our gratitude and thanks with our Yellow Lady Slipper sponsors this evening. These include Wendy Paulson, Karen and Bob Lewis, and the Birdie, Eva, Hezekiah, and Susie Charitable Gift Fund. And last but not least, our Wood Orchard sponsors. Huge shout out and thank you to Ray and Cindy Wilson, Lynn Donaldson and Cam Avery, and Janet Holt-Rippey and Frederick Holtz. And before introducing our speaker, I would like to share a warm thank you to our Oak Level sponsors who you can see on the slide and learn more at our website, faithandplace.org. To all of our sponsors, just thank you. It's amazing to have a whole community of individuals and organizations who make our environment and spirituality work possible. We're stronger together, and we just give you so much love and so much appreciation for all of your support of Faith in Place. And now at this time, I'd like to introduce Faith in Place's Development Officer, Michelle Liu, who will be introducing our keynote speaker for this evening. Michelle?
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce our keynote speaker for this summit, Lama Rod Owens. Lama Rod is a Black Buddhist Southern Queen and an internationally renowned teacher whose transformative work and teachings have resonated with so many across the globe. He holds a Master of Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School and is the author of several impactful books, including his most recent book, which our staff team has been exploring in a book hub called The New Saints: From Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors. Check out his website, lamarod.com, to learn more about his works. Today, Lama Rod will guide us in exploring the deep and essential connection between our personal well-being and the health of the planet. Lama Rod will speak to how systems of violence like capitalism, racism, and patriarchy intersect with the environmental crises, slowing our efforts towards healing our communities and relationship with Mother Earth. As Lama Rod is sharing, please feel free to share questions in the chat or with your watch party tech person, and we'll get to as many as we can after he shares. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lama Rod Owens.
Okay. Thank you so much to Michelle for this really wonderful introduction, and to Faith in Place for extending this really beautiful invitation. I am so deeply moved by organizations and collectives, particularly collectives of faith and who are deeply rooted in spirituality, coming together and asking these really important questions about the care and the tending to of our precious earth and the land, right? And everything connected to the land and the earth, including ourselves. This is incredible work, and it becomes even more powerful when we link our faith and practice and spiritualities into this work, to make this work much more meaningful, to link it to something higher, and much more profound, than maybe our ordinary lives, right? To honor the earth with deep intentions and aspirations of liberation and freedom, right? So I'm deeply moved to be here, and again, deep appreciation to all the staff and the team who have made this conference possible as well, and to all the organizers who are organizing across the region to tune into this as well. So thank you so much. Deep gratitude. Again, my name is Lama Rod Owens. I use he, him pronouns. And currently, I am living and teaching on the ancestral lands of the Creek, Muskogee, and Cherokee people here in a city called Atlanta, or as sometimes we call it here, the ATL. This is very much my homeland, as well as my family has been on this land for many generations as well, primarily first as enslaved people, and then as free people living on this land that was again taken and confiscated from the indigenous communities who first lived here. So as I began, I offered deep appreciation to the indigenous and native peoples of this land who are still here as well. And I offer deep appreciation and recognition to my ancestors and the ancestors of so many people who were forced to be on lands that were not their own, that they were not born on, right? To offer deep appreciation to the labor that has been offered in the face of such intense oppression and violence, right? And I welcome you into this space. I am a visitor. I am invited into this space, but I still would like to welcome you into this space. And I would like to welcome all of you, not just who you think you are, but also I welcome your most profound, authentic expressions, right? Your most divine and sacred self. I welcome into this space. I welcome both your joy and your pain into the space. I welcome your clarity as well as your confusion to be here as well. I welcome your ancestors as well as I also welcome your descendants too. I welcome everything about you to be here, to be present. And I invite you as well, as this is a part of my personal practice and teaching, I invite you to invite yourself here as well, to allow yourself to take up space wherever you are watching this, right? To allow your full selves to be present, to be fluid, to be open, right? To allow all of the complexities of that make us to have their space, right? Not to push anything away, but to say welcome, right? It's that welcome, that radical, profound welcome, right? That says, okay, here you are. So I offer you space to be here, right? And this is so deeply rooted in Buddhist practice as well, to allow space to hold whatever arises, even though we may not agree with it, even though we struggle with it, we still say welcome, right? And as we offer welcome to all the parts of who and what we are, we're also not judging, we're not reacting, but we're just holding, allowing everything to be present, to be as it is. And for me, that is the most direct expression of love. This radical allowance that says welcome, that allows, right? That accepts, right? And so when I say accept, I don't mean condone, I don't mean celebrate, right? When I say acceptance, I say, okay, here you are. All right, here you are. I don't want to push you away. I want to be in a caring relationship, even to the things that I am always habitually avoiding and bypassing. The pain, the confusion, but even more so, I want to be in a relationship with my brokenheartedness, my anxiety that feels much more than just personal right now, but it is also collective. This collective anxiety and also this collective brokenheartedness, right? Because we are people in a moment of personal and collective struggle. And this personal and collective struggle is really about reducing harm, reducing violence, right? And actually beginning to open to joy, to care, to gratitude, to this experience of spaciousness, to really allow this experience of spaciousness. For me, the spaciousness is an expression of divinity, of sacredness, of God, right? Of God as well as an expression of what we would call Buddha nature in Buddhism, right? Buddha nature being our most aware, awoke, clear experiences of our minds, which is nothing but love itself. To allow the sacredness to hold us. Because in this period of struggle, we need the care of spaciousness. We need the care of the divine. We need the care of God, right? We need the care of the deities who are here helping us to get free from the pain, get free from the suffering, to reduce the violence and the harm. Right? But we want to be free. I think this is ultimately our deepest desires, to be free, to remember what we are, And I always say to remember what instead of who, because in my practice, I think my most freest expression is a state of being beyond the binaries of good and bad and up and down, or the binaries of sadness and happiness, right? To remember that I am this expression that transcends all of these paradoxes, this tension of the binary, right? To remember that I am not the violence that I see myself getting wrapped up in, right? I am not the heartbreak, right? I am not the rage. I am not the numbness. I am not the apathy, right? I am not these things, but these are still experiences that I'm having in this moment. And to work to transcend these experiences is so much a part of the work that I've been engaging in for many years, right? To remember, right? To remember and to actually lift into that remembrance, right? I grew up in the Black church here in the South, and one of the things we would always say growing up is that we should remember that we're children of God, that I am a child of God, right? And I think sometimes those teachings and kind of become a little bit cliche, right? You know, oh, I'm a child of God, you know, or in Buddhism, we would say, oh, we're already awakened beings, you know, we just have to remember that, you know, it becomes cliche, you know, and you stop listening to it. But then you get to a point in your life when you come back to these teachings, you come back to these really simple sermons or talks that we remember, and then you say, wait, I am a child of God. I am an expression of this profound awakened state of being. And that begins to change you. And that's something that I rely on every day to remember that even though I am struggling to reconnect to that state, I can still place a lot of faith and a lot of trust in knowing that ultimately this is what I am, that I am an expression of divinity, of something sacred, right? And how do I live into that sacredness, right? How do I begin to honor that sacredness in all of my relationships, not just with people, but also with animals, right? With plants, with the elements. But even more specifically, how do I honor the sacred relationship in relationship to the earth, to the land, whom I considered conscious and awakened and like a deity? So we often call the earth, the land, the Mother Earth, Gaia, Pachamama, right? And I think that's important because the earth has offered life to all beings and continues to offer that life. And that offering for me elevates the land to this expression of God as the mother, right? And to understand and to return back to this relationship with the land where we understand that the land is not just our mother, but the land, the earth is our first ancestor, right? We all descend from the earth, right? It is our common ancestor, right? And so when I think about, you know, just where we are in the world, both politically, socially, and also more specifically in terms of environmental crisis and collapse, I always come back to this really vital work of remembering, because so much is out of place, so much is out of balance, right? And this imbalance has began because we have forgotten our sacredness, We've forgotten our deep relationship to the natural world, to the land. There are so many people who are labeling themselves climate activists, and environmental activists who themselves actually don't understand the consciousness of the land, of the earth, that like they see the earth, the land as something that should be saved, when in fact the earth is asking for remembrance and collaboration, right? The land, the earth isn't actually needing to be saved, actually. The land, the earth will actually survive well after maybe we are extinct, possibly, potentially, right? And so when I think about climate activism and environmentalism and action related to the earth, it's not so much that the earth needs to be saved, it's that we need to be saved from ourselves. That we have to be saved from all the ways in which we have distanced ourselves from the awakened consciousness of the land and the earth. The ways in which systems like patriarchy and capitalism, which have all kind of flowed into historic colonization and colonialism, right, has been this force that has disrupted so many communities from this fundamental connection to the earth, this fundamental awareness that the land is alive, that it is conscious, that it is always talking to us, that it has given birth to us, right? That we are being called back into relationship with the land, right? Because the land, the earth, is actually trying to save us, right? The earth is trying to save us, but we have, in many ways, lost the capacity to listen to the land, to listen to the earth, to return back to the land, to walk the land, and to feel the medicine, the communication of the land rising to meet us, to hold us. Right? In my practice, around this work, it has become so important for me to return back to touching the earth, to touching the land. I will admit, I am someone who grew up kind of being afraid of the earth. Right? I was kind of afraid to get dirty, right? And to roll around in the dirt. I was like, oh, I don't want to get my clothes dirty. And I didn't grow up necessarily with this deep appreciation and understanding of the land, right? So the land was something that I felt was to be used, in a way dominated, not embraced, not considered an ally, not considered even a mother, but as something that like just kind of gave me what I needed with no appreciation, right? And so when I began my practice, particularly beginning my Buddhist practice and beginning with meditation, I began to really hear the earth in a really surprising way, right? The earth just kind of appeared in my practice. The land rose in my practice and said, if you really want to be free, you have to learn how to be in relationship with me, to listen to me, to learn to touch me, right? To walk me, right? To be in relationship to the plant medicines that emerge from me, right? To be able to have this capacity to lie on the earth and feel the earth rise to hold me, to know that whatever happens in my life, the land is always rising to hold us, right? And the land kept saying, I am this expression of unconditional love, right? Unconditional love, a love and a care that comes with no strings attached, with no consequences. I don't have to earn the love of the earth because the earth is just naturally loving me. And to realize too that it's so hard for us to connect to that sense of love from the earth because many of us have been so deeply hurt and wounded by the violence of conditional love. The violence of conditional love, the love and care that we have received only because we have made someone else happy, or that we have enabled someone else, that we have performed in a certain way, and we're rewarded with the care that we need to survive. And that kind of love, conditional love, is only an act of violence because it does not allow us to emerge, to blossom, to expand in our most natural selves, our most authentic, loving, caring, direct selves, right? And so when we're trying to connect to the earth in this way, to the land who's trying to love us, we have to also negotiate the wounds, the trauma of all the ways that we have been hurt and survived the violence of conditional love. And the earth is saying, yes, I see that, I feel that, and I can heal that if you can come and lie on me, if you can come and touch me and allow me to help you hold the pain that we struggle to hold by ourselves, right? This is the root of the activism that I'm deeply engaging in right now, not just to save the planet, not just to learn how to recycle, not just to save up money to buy an electric car, right? Not just like becoming a vegan, right? Not engaging in these performative things, even though extremely important and necessary, but to go deeper into our activism and say, actually, the way that we're going to take care of the earth is by us remembering that we are lovable, that we deserve to be loved, to allow that love to fill us up and to change how we move through the world, to allow that love that the earth is always trying to share with us to disrupt the ways in which we may be so into over-consuming the material world in order to bypass or to soften the hurt, the pain that we all feel. That hurt and the pain that can only be healed and tended to by real unconditional love. Unconditional love rooted and expanding from the land itself. Right? The earth is trying to save us by loving us. But we have been so distracted and conditioned by the expression of unconditional love, or rather conditional love, as it has been expressed through these systems of violence, patriarchy, capitalism, misogyny, and so forth. Our relationship to the earth and our healing of the planet is really about collective transformation. It is about all the ways that we have to return back to our most authentic and indigenous selves. So there's a lot happening right now, not just climate crisis, but politics. We're still functioning within COVID, right? There's so much still happening. And in my work, I have called this an age or a period of apocalypse, right? And because I am also trained, I'm a divinity school graduate as well. So, I have a lot of this language, as well under my belt. And, apocalypse really, it's not really about the end of the world, right? It's really about unveiling, truth telling, and telling the truth after you've been kind of kind of distracted for so long, telling the truth really feels almost violent, right? Because it really cuts through our delusions and gets us to the truth of things. And I think this is what's happening right now in this world. Collectively, we're getting to the truth of things. And so much of this truth is having to understand that these systems of violence have so deeply wounded us, and that the way forward is synonymous with the work of profound individual and collective healing. That we have to go back to the wounds and to begin to tend to the woundedness, to the sadness, to the brokenheartedness, to the trauma, both individually and collectively, both intergenerational as well as transhistorical. The traumas that began generations well before we were born, and traumas, transhistorical traumas that will continue unless we choose to do the work of healing right now. And again, the healing is returning back to the site of these wounds, which for me feels like time travel, right? To return back into history, to return back into past generations, to return back into the lives of our ancestors, and to do this work of acknowledging and then holding the pain of so much that has happened before our births, and to grieve, to individually and collectively grieve. That grieving is the work of connecting to the pain and allowing the energy of that pain, that suffering, to move, to be released. And the grieving brings us deeper and deeper and closer to the truth of who and what we are. It brings us deeper and closer to the actual reality of this awakened land as the mother. The grieving is how we begin to remember who we are and what has been responsible for our well-being and our survival and our lives in general. Right? And are we ready for that? You know? Are we ready to return back into these histories and these narratives? Are we ready to actually begin to interrogate who we are descendant from? Are we ready to do this profound caretaking of our ancestors? Right? Are we ready to really begin to tell the truth about how far we are from remembering who we were? So not only is this an age of apocalypse, this is also an age of a return back to indigeneity, right? One of the core meanings of indigeneity or indigenous is related to this idea of being from the earth, like being connected to the earth, springing from the earth, right? So for me to return back to the earth, to return back to touching the earth, to walking the earth, to remembering that the earth is asking for collaboration, for partnership, right? For tending. To remember that is to return back to a new expression of indigeneity. And this is a path that we all must take. Right? And this work is slow. This work may feel really overwhelming, but this is the only work I know of that can tend to the heart of the problem, the issues that we're facing right now. And to understand that the reality of climate instability is related to racism, it's related to patriarchy, it's related to all the politics that are going on. Everything is interconnected, right? As one of my favorite philosophers once saying, everything is everything. And that's from our great philosopher, Lauryn Hill. Everything is everything, meaning that like one thing points to another. right? So climate instability isn't this, autonomous thing that's arising. It is deeply related to all the ways in which systems have been colluding together to create this specific moment in history and time. This kind of like edge almost that we've been invited to. And this edge is asking us to make a different choice now. Like, are we going to remember, or are we going to keep cycling within this intense experience of forgetfulness? This experience where we are not taking responsibility for our own divinity, for our own sacredness. To choose to do this labor, to choose freedom, right? Freedom from all the ways in which our suffering creates the conditions of overconsumption and violence and harm and apathy that feels so rampant right now? Are we going to choose to remember who we are? And in choosing to remember who we are, we choose to return back to the land. And in choosing to return back to the land, we are choosing to remember our indigeneity. We are all indigenous people, right? Even if we're living on lands that we were not born on our lands that we cannot trace multiple generations back on, we are still indigenous. We all still come from land, right? And to remember that land, that the earth is conscious and awakened and is loving us. And that loving us is trying to help us survive. To
Enjoy it.
remember that.
That's a gift from me.
Oh,
No.
really? Thank you.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
be putting more out because I'm working on that section.
Yeah.
It's a sign from God. I know I have been someone whose, mute has suddenly like disengaged on a big thing like this. And so this is the time we're living in, right? But just to finish up, this to return back, right, to this indigeneity is really the only choice that we have in order to see the future that we most want to see. To remember who we are and to understand that we are not systems, right? I may have been deeply conditioned by patriarchy, but my work is to disrupt, to undo that conditioning, right? And the conditioning of many systems of violence, right? And for me, again, so much of that work has been learning how to be with the land, to be with the earth, and it's also been allowing myself to grieve, right? And I think this is one of the great collective experiences of the future. I think we need to learn how to grieve together, not to hide our grief, right? Not to push it away, to cover it up, but to actually come together in community and to cry together, to hold each other, right? To grieve everything that feels confusing, that feels overwhelming, just to grieve it, right? To create rituals of grief, right? And to have this ethic of care where we are being called to tend to each other's softest selves, right? Our softest, most vulnerable selves. And that's what I long for. And this is what I try to do in my work, is to create spaces where we're tending to our softness, our vulnerability, to heal as we do this, right? And the earth, the land is asking for this in this moment, to return back to the land, to return back to her and to grieve with her. And as we grieve, we are remembering. And as we remember, we begin to make different choices about the future that we want to bring about. So I just wanted to eventually have just a few minutes for questions, but I want to just spend, just a couple of minutes before we get into questions. And I just want to invite you into this practice with the earth that I've been talking about, right? And so no matter where you are, you don't have to be outside either. You can be wherever you are. And I invite you just to notice, your seat and the weight of your body. If you're standing up, noticing your feet on the floor. If you're lying down, noticing again what's rising to hold you. And as we touch this surface that's supporting us, I invite you to mentally allow your attention to touch deeper down into the land that's holding everything. And this is a very kind of abstract experience here. But essentially, when I think about the land, when I think about the earth, I am mentally touching the earth. And when I'm mentally touching the earth like I am now, the earth, the land, and its awakened consciousness is touching me back. So to remember the land is to be in this connection in this moment. So just hold space for that, feel that. Don't react to anything, but just allow this thought that I am touching the land and the land is touching me, allowing that thought to kind of float within the spaciousness of your mind. And as we connect like this, I invite you to offer this deep appreciation to the earth, this deep gratitude. And we're thanking the land for her love, for her guidance, for her nurturing. And as we offer this appreciation, I also invite you to open to what the earth is trying to offer you in this moment. What are you feeling? What's being communicated? What's being shared or offered? What does the earth need from you? Just noticing. And so when you're ready, I invite you to return your attention to the seat or the surface you're resting on, noticing the weight of your body and the surface rising to hold you. To know that our bodies are expressions of the earth, and that the earth is an expression of all of our collective bodies together. I think this is one of the most important reflections we can offer to the earth is to remember that we are extensions of the earth, and that the extension, and that our bodies are extensions of the earth, and the earth is an extension of our bodies. To return back to that profound connection. And to practice like this is really to deeply inform our activism. That we're not acting on behalf of the earth, we are acting with the earth to benefit all of us. So when you're ready, I just invite you to offer some movement back into your bodies and just to stretch a little bit as well as we come into just this, just this short period of questions that you may have. And I apologize, I won't be able to get to all of them, but hopefully we'll get to at least 3 or 4.
Oh, the mute button. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Lama Rod, and leading us in that practice together. Many folks in the chat are really resonating with your insights. So now I'm just going to transition us to a Q&A to discuss some of the questions that we received of the audience. So one person asked, when you were sharing about spaciousness, you said that spaciousness is an expression of divinity. Can you share more about what spaciousness means or feels like? What practices can invite us into experiencing that?
Yeah. Well, spaciousness is such a profound, I say, medicine, right? But space is this experience of fluidity, of movement, of potential, right? And I think of the highest divine or sacred principles as being full of potential, right? There's no end, but there's this profound expansion that's always happening, that's always extending, always further and further out. And I want to dance with that. So spaciousness is remembering that there's always potential, there's always a choice, that no matter how much is happening, I have the capacity just to hold everything. When I say holding everything or using the phrase holding space, I mean that I'm disrupting my reactivity. We find ourselves habitually reacting to everything, thoughts, emotions, feelings, all the time, right? But what would it feel like to let go of reacting? And then as you react, you begin to actually, as you let go of reacting, you begin to experience all the space. Like you don't feel so crowded. You don't feel so rigid, right? There's this profound capacity to experience, not just react to, but to experience whatever is arising. And in terms of Buddhism, to experience is to open the door to real freedom, to real liberation, right? So that's space for me. And that's, again, divine, sacred, because space helps us to remember that we are essentially also expressions of spaciousness as well, if we can just remember that, right? Okay.
Thank you. I love that. I think that is also very hopeful, you saying that it's really a choice to open up that spaciousness. So thank you. I appreciate that. Another person asked, the process of reconnecting with indigenous ways of living is slow, but we are also facing urgent ecological crises. How do you balance the slow, careful work of returning to the land and healing from systems of harm with the need to act quickly and prevent irreversible damage to the planet?
Well, the thing is, it's going to happen, I think, anyway. I think one of the things that I always have to point out is that we're so tied to urgency that we're disconnected from the reality that, oh, we may actually have to experience climate collapse, right? And I think there are some of us, I think more and more people who are actually, their activism is actually trying to figure out what life is going to be like on the other side of collapse, to start thinking about those systems. And this is why you see so many people returning back to land. There's so many land-based collectives forming where people are learning how to farm, again, learning how to make medicines from the land, learning how just to do simple things that we find ourselves distant from, right? To learn how to live collectively again, beyond the principles of capitalism. Like, how can we need to start thinking about that, right? Because that's always, that's this kind of like colonized thinking says that like it's too slow, right? It's like we have to work fast. We have to understand that like we're using colonized and carceral logics to address something that can only be tended to by returning back to indigenous wisdoms and ways of being, which inherently is slow for a reason, right? Because these systems have created the illusion of, quickness and this fast-pacedness that we can't even like let go of that. Like everything has to be quick. There's an emergency, we have to respond to it, or we trust our practice, we trust our beliefs to understand that maybe like I'm supposed to die. Maybe the world, this earth isn't my real home, right? And lastly, just to say, to tie this in together, yes, you have to balance the urgency and the slowness as well, but you also have to begin to mourn the fact that we will see climate collapse, and we are seeing it right now in this moment. And when are we going to deal with that? When are we going to actually start grieving and letting our hearts break instead of like, just dumping everything into this urgency, which is, I think, bypassing the reality that we have to emotionally process a world that's quickly changing. That's indigenous practice, right? And so this is why we have to listen to indigenous communities, to indigenous folks, right? Who've never, for centuries, who've never stopped caring for the land, and for those of us who are just showing up to activism, to climate stability work, like we need to understand that we're coming from a colonized positionality, and that has to be checked a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you I think that's kind of part of the unveiling, I think, of those thought processes. And we have one last question from the Watch Party in Michigan City, Indiana. How can we carry this message without violence, without compounding the wounds that we wish to heal? Because in a divided world, everything is perceived as an act of aggression.
Well, I think first and foremost, not all of us are going to get on the side of healing. In theory in Buddhism, we're all trying to get free, and like I'm supposed to try to free everyone from delusion. I get that. And I also understand that not everyone's ready for that. Right. And so part of this labor is to say, you know what, there are some certain people who are not going to get this. And I have to grieve that, in this really intensely divided world, like at some point you have to start really showing up to the people who are ready to get free and let go of all this energy that we're trying to channel into people who are so resistant to the work. They're so resistant that we're getting trapped in their resistance and losing the focus on the people who really need our care and support, who are ready to get free, right? And so we don't stop loving people, but we start practicing wisdom and saying, okay, there are people ready to do the work. I want to focus on them. I don't spend time with people who are, opposed to everything that I say. I'm not interested in winning hearts. I'm not interested in converting anyone to anything, right? I just do my work, and who's ever interested in that work, who's ever on the same page, I'm like, okay, let's get together and work together to get free. Again, I want to encourage everyone to return back to the practice of grief, Like, you need to start grieving everything that's not working out, right? You have to grieve all the people who insist on voting for political candidates who will harm us instead of helping us, right? Like, we have to grieve all of that and say, okay, and I know it's hard for some of us because some of us, we have to deal with this in our families. They're beloveds who we are really struggling with right now because they hold views that feel really opposed, to our beliefs, right? And we have to grieve that as well. Again, for me, I am called to love everyone. I'm not called to like everyone. Right? So I think once we start understanding there are people that we are just not going to like, but that doesn't mean that I do not want them to be free and to suffer less. Both can happen, there are people, quite frankly, some of you will not ever be friends with Donald Trump. Let's just put it out there. Let's just call the devil out. Right? Name the devil and then you get rid of the devil. But I'm not interested in being BFF with Donald Trump, but I want him to be free. I want the people who hurt me the most and who've hurt my ancestors the most to be free from suffering. I don't like them though. And I don't have to let that dislike turn into violence. And that's something that grief can help us to discern. That my dislike of you doesn't mean that I'm getting in the way of what you need to get free. So that's what I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much for your responses, Lama Rod. That brings us to the conclusion of our Q&A session. As we wrap up our first summit session, on behalf of everyone here today, I just want to extend our deepest gratitude to Lama Rod for sharing tonight. Your ability to address such deeply challenging topics with gravity and grace has given us so much to reflect on and integrate into our own journey. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
You're all so much.
You can find out more about Lama Rod's work and where to buy his books via his website, lamarod.com, which is linked in the chat or accessible by the QR code on the screen for those of you who are joining an in-person watch party. Now, for those of you attending a local watch party, we invite you to gather now to reflect on what Lama Rod shared together. And for those of you joining us virtually, we encourage you to keep the conversation going online on Hilo, our online event networking platform. If you aren't signed up already for Hilo, it's free to join and you can do so through the link in the chat. I also want to remind you that we have an exciting lineup of upcoming sessions throughout the summit. You can find the full agenda, including details on our next sessions via the link in the chat. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors and partners without whom this event would not be possible. As a reminder, the slides, recording, and resources for all the summit sessions will be emailed out next week and available on our summit website. So if you're joining from a watch party, please be sure that you are registered before you leave for the evening so that you have access to those. And we also invite you to complete our summit survey for a chance to win a $50 gift card after you join the last session that you're able to be a part of. You can find the link in the chat and it will also be emailed out next week as well. Well, thank you all for being here today and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.